Um, the session that I'm going to do now is really one of my favorite sessions, and Jim did the Guaranteed Principles for Church Failure yesterday, which I absolutely love that session, and I've heard it a dozen times, and I still love to hear it. And a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about are really similar to that. He's just takes the lighthearted kind of approach to it, when I'm just going to be a little more forward and direct. But I like to give a little bit of background of kind of how I came upon things, and I do that with this session as well, because I'm a church guy. I mean, I'm just a church guy. I mean, I grew up in church. My family started going to church when I was 8 years old, and that's all I've ever known in my life is church. So, I mean, I'm very comfortable at church. I like church. I'm just that guy. I mean, I have a hard time connecting or really understanding people that say, I don't want to go to church. I want to go to church. I like to go to church. And so it's a little strange. But then as when I graduated from high school, I went to Hillsdale in Oklahoma. That's how I ended up starting my ministry in Oklahoma. And so I grew up in church in California, and then went to Hillsdale and immediately got involved at the Grace Free Will Baptist Church in Oklahoma City. Spent 8 years in ministry and on staff there at that church, and then went from that church. I was called to the Ada First Free Will Baptist Church down in southern Oklahoma. Spent 6 years there at that church as a staff pastor, and then I spent 13 years at the First Free Will Baptist Church in Sulphur, Oklahoma as the lead pastor. And so for the first, 30 years, 28, whatever that is, I don't even do all the math, 25 years, whatever, of my ministry, I was at a church because I was either on staff or it was where I grew up or whatever, and it's just all you know. And some of you may be here today kind of in the same situation me, that church is just very natural for you. And probably most of us are in that category. Church is just natural for us. It's just who we are. It's what we've grown up doing. It's what we're used to or whatever. But something very significant happened in my life that really made me kind of rethink all that stuff. And it was after I'd pastored and been on staff at churches for all those years, I went to the state office as the state mission director in Oklahoma, and my wife and I found ourselves looking for a church. And we'd never done that before. I had never looked for a church. Now, I candidated at a couple of churches when I went on staff, but that's a whole different process than if you are just a visitor looking for a church. Now, we were Christians, and we were going to find a church, and we were committed to be at a Free Will Baptist church, obviously. But and Oklahoma City has a lot of great churches, but we found as we traveled around and visited churches, we discovered something we really didn't know. That is, there are no perfect churches. And we were looking for the perfect church. And I got to looking back, and I thought, man, what was our church like that I pastored and that I was the lead pastor at for those 13 years? What was our church like? And I looked back, and I thought, I loved our church. Man, I thought our church was great. We had an awesome church. But it was what I knew. It was what I was comfortable with. It was my church. But then when we began to travel around and try to find a church, we went to a lot of churches in the Oklahoma City area. And like I said, there's a lot of good churches. And we struggled trying to find a church where we really felt like we fit in. And we were church people. We're Free Will Baptists, lifelong Free Will Baptists. My wife's grandfather was a Free Will Baptist pastor in California. And so, she's a third generation Free Will Baptist, maybe even before that. And I grew up from, like I said, 8 years old being Free Will Baptist. That's all we've ever known. That's all we ever have done. And yet we struggled. We found ourselves struggling trying to find a church where we really felt at home and where we really fit in. And finally, we settled in at a church, and we began going there on a regular basis. And I was traveling some around the state, doing state mission work and promoting the state mission program and our support plan and all of that. So my wife was there a lot more than I was. But one thing that I found was that you have a whole different set of eyes when you're a visitor than when it's your church. Things look different. And I'll never forget the very first time that we walked into the church that eventually became our church home. And it was, I don't mean to keep the name a secret, I'm not going to tell you, but some of you could figure it out. But it's not a real attractive building. In fact, it's kind of an ugly building. Now, they've remodeled it. It looks a lot better now than it did then, but it was a dome. Now, I don't know whoever thought it was a good idea to put a church in a dome back in the whatever 80s or 90s, but they built churches and they're under these domes. Well, that wasn't so bad, but what our church had done, somebody had decided that the stage was too dark and it needed some more lights. And so they put up a big light bar and they hung some lights. Well, that was fine because this stage needed more lighting, and this was all prior to us getting there. But what they did was, because there's no attic space or crawl space or whatever, they ran that flexible metal conduit stuff on the outside of the wall, all the way up the wall, right where you could see it, to that light bar. And that used to bug me it drove me crazy. I would go into church and I would sit up there while we're singing. I would think, who was thinking that looked good? I mean, that is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. I can't believe they ran that conduit on the outside of the drywall on that ceiling. That looks terrible. And it's crooked. I mean, it's not even straight. At least they could have, and I know I have a little OCD tendencies. I know, a little bit, just a very little bit. But it just drove me crazy. And I found myself, now, let me just say, we had a very deep connection with the pastor and his family, and we were there because that pastor loved us and reached out to us and invited us and wanted us to be a part of his church. Because if I went on the aesthetics, I wouldn't have went there very long because that drove me crazy. I mean, I could not walk in that church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, whatever, and not look up at the ceiling and think, what in the world were they thinking? But you know what I discovered over the 2 years that we went to that church? After a few weeks, I'd still look at it and think, oh man, that can't believe they did. That's crazy. But then after a couple of months, I'd glance at it every now and then. But after a few months, I didn't even realize that conduit was there anymore because I got used to it. It didn't bother me anymore. Nothing was done about it till much later, the sanctuary, and it was after my wife and I actually had left, but the sanctuary flooded and the church ended up going in and completely gutting it and remodeling it, and thank the Lord they took that down. And it looks beautiful now. It really is a very beautiful building inside now. They did a great job. But I tell that story as an example of what it's like whenever we're so used to things and we're so comfortable because it's ours. And we're comfortable with it and we like it. And most of us are so far removed from being a church visitor that we have forgotten what it's like to be a church visitor. We have completely forgotten what it's like to be looking for a church. And like I said, many of you maybe even were like me. You never had to look for a church. And if you're ever in that situation or whatever that you have to, it's a whole different lens that you're looking through when it comes to churches and how they compare to what it's like when it's just a part of who you are and it's what you're used to and it's what you love. I've heard people say, oh, but I just love my church. And that's great. You should love your church. But people in the community don't love your church. People in the community, in fact, if any one given person, and I'll just say in Wichita, Kansas, decides some Sunday because of something that's happened in their family or their life or whatever, or they wake up on Easter morning or whatever, and they decide, you know what, we probably ought to take our family to church today, there's probably 50 choices of churches that they could go to. And so, now, we talked a little bit about outreach yesterday when we were talking about systems and having an outreach strategy. That's why outreach is so important in getting your name in the community, because we want them to choose our church if they're going to visit a church. And if yours is just one of many, many choices, you need to stand out in the community to be a church that cares and that is, welcoming and all that sort of stuff. But that's a different topic. But they have a lot of choices of churches that they can go to. And so we need to make sure that when guests do come to our church, and we spend all that effort and time and resource and everything, money in the community to make people think that we really do care and love them and that we're concerned about people, when they really show up, we want to make sure that we live up to what we've been portraying. And so what does that look like? How do we create a wow factor in our church. And I borrowed that term, a wow factor, from an author that I love to read, Gary McIntosh, and I was asked about some resources yesterday, and he's one that I recommend, especially in these types of subjects, because he has a lot of great insights. But he has a portion of a book that he calls, it's a chapter in an article. It was actually separate in an article for a while, but it was called Getting Ready for Company. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, I have a favorite outfit that I like to wear at home. They're really ugly, green and black, flaming, they're like green flame pajama pants. And I'm always cold, I'm cold-natured, and so those are really comfortable pajama pants, and I wear them at home a lot. And I wear that, and I wear a sweatshirt, or I wear a long-sleeve T-shirt, and usually have a blanket. I look like an 80-year-old man sitting there in the chair at night watching TV or whatever. But I'm completely comfortable, and I love those clothes. And I could be fine at home wearing it all the time. I don't know what you guys are saying, but knock it off. But you know what? If company's going to come over to my house, if I know company's coming, I'm going to change my clothes. I'm going to put on something more presentable. I'm going to do the best with what I've got to work with. It may not be a whole lot, but I'm going to do the best with what I've got to work with. Why should it be any different in the church? You see, we say we want visitors. We say we want new people to come to our church. But then when people do show up, first of all, we usually act surprised. Wow, somebody really did come. A visitor showed up. Hey, who's that? I don't recognize them. In fact, let me just give you some scenarios and see if any of these sound familiar. The preschool Sunday school teacher shows up late. The kids are running around the room, and a mom walks in and sees that there's no adults, so she sits in there to wait for the teacher to show up, and a new family comes in to drop off their child, and the mom says, well, the teacher's not here, so I'm just sitting with the kids until the teacher shows up. Or the junior boys teacher calls, and he calls the pastor 30 minutes before Sunday school starts and says, well, I just remembered I have to go here or there. I'm not going to be able to be there for Sunday school, so why don't you just have the junior boys join with the junior girls class today and everything will be fine. Well, the pastor knows that the junior girls class had a special mother-daughter tea planned for that day, and so he has to try to get somebody to come in and teach the junior boys last minute that's not prepared. This is my favorite. The lady that's scheduled to sing the special in Sunday morning service announces right before she sings, she really hasn't had much time to practice, so just listen to the words. I may be striking a nerve, I don't know, but I'm telling you. Or this is another one that gets me, and boy, if you've pastored, you know the pain of this, but you've been promoting and planning a special church-wide event for months. You've been talking about it to your church. You've been begging people to come. You've been telling them about this special series of services you're going to have. And then the week before, 4 of your key families, some of them who are on stage, tells you, well, Pastor, we just decided we needed to get away for a while, and it happens to be that weekend. Or visitation night rolls around, and, here it is, another Thursday night or another Tuesday night or whatever, and no one but Brother Herman shows up for visitation. Or you pull up to the church on Sunday morning and you notice that the person that was supposed to cut the grass didn't show up. The flower bed's got weeds in it. And whoever was supposed to come on Saturday and clean the church must have been in a hurry because there's, stuff still laying around or whatever. Do I need to go on? I think we all recognize a lot of these things. And yet, if you look at those one by one by one by one, we think, that's not a big deal. Everybody has to get away once in a while, and that's true. And everybody has to can't do certain things or get tight on commitment time or whatever. And I understand all those things. But my premise and my point in all of this is that when it's just us, we understand those things. We understand if the person that's supposed to clean the church has, an emergency or whatever, and they can't get here. Our church folks understand that. If you come in and say, pray for brother so-and-so, whatever, and he was supposed to clean the church yesterday, but he got called away in a family emergency. We understand that. We get that. We love him. We pray for him, whatever. But a visitor doesn't know that. Now, again, I know some things are out of our control, and I get all of that. And you say, well, where are you going with all this? Well, try to put it in a spiritual context. I do have a scriptural basis for this. And it's simply John 3:16 that says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son." You say, what in the world does that have to do with creating a wow factor? Did you notice that it said that God gave his only Son? God is God. Did you ever really think about this? God could have created out of nothing. He could have, poof, here's a perfect, spotless lamb that's going to take away the sins of the world. But he didn't do that. He gave us the one thing that was a part of himself, and we don't understand how that works, but he gave us his only begotten Son, his best. He gave us the very best because it was that important to him. And my thought is, if God would give us his best, shouldn't we give back to him our very best? I'm reminded of the passage that says, I would not give God anything that doesn't cost me something. Quick story, and I'm going to move on and give you some practical things about how we can create a wow factor for our church. But it was back in the early 2000s, and I took my first trip to Cuba on a mission trip. And in those early 2000 years, I was serving on the Hillsdale Board of Trustees, and Brother Carl Cheshire was our president at that time, and he had a son that was a jeweler, still is, and his son had made some watches that were Hillsdale logo on the watch, and it said Hillsdale Free Baptist College. Beautiful watches. I love my Hillsdale watch, and I wore it with pride. I mean, I wore it all the time. And Brother Carl gave those watches to all the board members as a Christmas gift one year when I was serving on the board. Well, not long after I'd gotten that watch, like I said, I wore it with pride. I loved that watch. I went to Cuba. And I was sitting in a service on the first night in Cuba, and Ciro Parla was our translator, a Cuban pastor there, and we became very close very quickly. Of course, he spoke good English, and he was our translator, and so it was easy to get to know him. And I noticed he kept looking at my watch. And so I kind of pulled my sleeve back, and I said, "You notice my watch?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "That's a nice watch, isn't it?" He said, "Yeah, it is." He said, "I've been admiring that." He said, "I love that watch." And I said, "I do too. This is my Hillsdale watch. This is a special watch." And he said, "I used to have a watch." He said, "But it broke." He said, "I don't have a watch anymore." I thought, God, please. Are you kidding me? I'm serious. I mean, I struggled for 2 days. God kept saying, "Give him your watch." And I kept saying, "God, not my Hillsdale watch. I can't get another one of those. I've got a dozen watches in my drawer at home. I'd buy him one if I could. Somewhere, there's nowhere to get them, but Lord, please not my Hillsdale watch." God kept nudging me, and I hadn't learned the generosity thing from Brother David yet. I wasn't here at Home Missions yet. But finally, after 2 days, I will never forget as I unstrapped that watch from my wrist, and I gave that watch to Ciro. And I thought, you know what? It's just a watch. I loved it. It was my favorite watch. But then I thought, you know what? That's the least I can do. And I could tell you another story. I don't have time to go into another story about another lesson God taught me on that very same trip about holding on to things that are precious to us, and how we can sometimes take those things, whether they be possessions or whether they be attitudes or whether they be traditions. Listen to me. Sometimes we have to be willing to let go of some things that are very precious to us if it means winning the souls of the lost that are around us. I didn't want to give up my watch, and I did it really honestly. I'll tell you now, I mean, I have a better attitude about it now, but I gave that watch very begrudgingly. I did not want to give it away. And so God gave us his son, the very best he had. Why should we offer to him anything less? And that could apply to a lot of things, and I want to apply that when it comes to our churches. When I was pastoring one time, I got a call from a family in our church, and I don't mean this to sound bad, because I know people, they didn't mean it in a bad way, but they said, Pastor, we've got an old upright piano that's just taking up room in our house. We want to get rid of it. We thought maybe the church could use it. Well, that old clunker has been in their house. I've seen it. It had a bunch of junk piled on it. It was all scratched up and out of tune. They didn't want it anymore. It's hard to move. What in the world would the church want with it? But that's kind of our attitude a lot of times is, well, I don't need this anymore. Brother David alluded to this when we talked about his generosity. We give away things that don't mean anything to us. And when we give away things that don't mean anything to us, there's no value in that gift. But it's whenever we give things that really are important to us. And so whatever that looks like for us, and I'm giving you all of these things because I think this is a real heart issue that we need to be willing to go to God and say, you know what, God, I don't know what it's going to look like in my life. I don't know how it's going to apply, but whatever it is that I can give, I'm willing to give it, no matter what it costs me, no matter how special it is or how precious it is to me. And the truth of the matter is, most of the time, it's not monetary. It is with our attitude, or with our tradition, or with our comfort, or whatever. And I'll never forget, when I was pastoring, I preached through a series of sermons that I called Whatever It Takes. And it was a transition point in our church, because we had said we were going to start focusing on the community and start focusing on the world and trying to reach more people for Christ. Our church was a good church, but we were a very flat church. We weren't really doing much. We weren't reaching people. People weren't really being saved that often. And I began preparing our church for some change that was going to come as God had laid it on my heart that God was going to do. And I asked our people to be willing to do whatever it takes to reach people with the gospel, whatever it takes. And there was a 70-something-year-old woman. We had special commitment cards printed up for this campaign, and it said, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And here's one thing, whatever, I don't remember exact wording, but there was a line you could write, something that you were willing to give up when it comes to an attitude or, a tradition or whatever. Because our church services were transitioning. They were looking a little different. We were doing different things. It was uncomfortable for a lot of people because we'd never done it that way before. And I remember that lady in her 70s came up and wrote on that commitment card, she was willing to do whatever it takes to reach people with the gospel. She got it. And we need to be willing to do whatever it takes to reach the community with the gospel. And so how do we do that? How do we create a wow experience? How do we take just our everyday average thing that we love, that we're very comfortable with, but make it something that other people want to be a part of? Tom Rainer did a study some time ago, and in that study, he talked about what first-time visitors expect when they go to a church. Now, there was a number of different things, but there were 3 or 4 that stuck out to me, that this is what a visitor, and again, this is just a study, and it could be accurate or not accurate in your area. I think it's pretty accurate. But let me give you just a few things. He said that according to this study, that when visitors attend churches, they expect people to be unfriendly. They expect it. Or they expect the church to be cliques or little groups. Okay? Now, I challenge you to do this. Pastors especially. This Sunday, when you get up and you do whatever you do to greet do your welcome time or whatever, if you do a stand up and mingle and greet and all that, I want you to notice if you have any visitors there, the visitors stand there, and most of the time everybody goes all around it. They'll get greeted once in a while, but the people that really congregate and get together are people that know each other. And we are friendly to people we know, but we are not that friendly to people we don't know. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But he said they expect people to be unfriendly. The second thing is, he said that according to this study, people that attend churches as visitors expect the services to be boring. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. I'm just giving them to you right now. The third thing is they expect you to ask them for their money. And then the fourth thing, and it was the last thing on the list, and it was kind of it wasn't really one of the things that people expect, but this was one of the comments that was turned in this survey that said that families with children are unsure what will happen to their children or with their children, and they're uncomfortable with that because most things aren't explained to them. They're just expected to drop their kids off because we all know what our kids are supposed to do. We all know where they go. Those of us who go to church, we're comfortable with that. We don't worry at all about it. We just send our kids back there. We know what they're doing. Visitors don't. So how do we create an experience that exceeds expectations of visitors? That's really, I think, the answer to all of this. We don't have to be rocket scientists and figure all this stuff out. All we have to do, if we're going to create a wow experience, is just exceed the expectations. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but the expectations of visitors are not very high to start with. It shouldn't be that hard for us to exceed the expectations of visitors. If they expect our services to be boring, if they expect us to be unfriendly, if they expect us to ask for their money, those aren't hard things to exceed their expectations in. And we'll talk about all those in just a few moments. And I'm going to move through some of this stuff very quickly because Brother Jim did hit on it yesterday some. And also, let me just do a plug, and I always do this because I believe in what he's doing, but the church health assessment that he does, it is phenomenal. And this is the type of things that the church health assessment looks at. Now, Brother Jim or nobody from our staff comes in and says, oh, we're going to grade you on all this stuff. No, you do that yourself, and your church does that. Because when your church does it, it means a lot more than if some outsider comes in and tells you, oh, you need to do A, B, C, and D. But if your church starts examining the body and you start looking at yourself in a different view or in a different way, it means a whole lot more. So let me give you several things as we go through this about creating the wow experience. The first one is we need to have excellence, do everything with excellence. And Josh mentioned that yesterday, and amen to that. I mean, it's not that hard to do everything that we can do with excellence. Now, I understand when you're doing 50 different things. I talked about Donna yesterday, the lady in my church that I asked to do everything because she always said yes. Everything she did wasn't excellent, and that's why it dawned on me, and I had to go to her and say, I'm sorry for overloading you, and we need to back off some things, because she was excellent. She was great at doing certain things. Nobody in our church could do it as well as Donna could do it, but not when I gave her 50 things to do. She couldn't do them with excellence. She didn't have time. And so we need to look at all of that on how we're overloading people and all of that, but we need to have excellence in everything that we do. Let me give you some specific areas. The first one is excellence in appearance. Now, it is not hard to spruce up the place, okay? Just clean it up, spruce it up, get rid of the excess, get rid of the junk. Look around at just how somebody that doesn't already love the place, how they would see it. When they walk in, do they see those chairs leaning up against the wall, or do they see that old ratty, piece of furniture that's been there forever, or do they see that big stain in the carpet where it looks like somebody was murdered, and you really know that it was from the teen lock-in or whatever? But visitors don't know that stuff, and so just look as a visitor would look. When you walk into your building, just look at everything that you can see. And that's what part of the church health assessment does. And I did an assessment when I was in Oklahoma, and basically what the thing that I wrote and what I led churches through doing was just starting at the ceiling and look at everything from the ceiling to the floor. Look at your ceiling tiles, look at your ceiling grid, look at your lights, look at your paint, look at the carpet, look at the walls. Are there holes, or are there, out-of-date things? I go into some churches that have home missions posters that nobody on staff is even the same picture. And that stands out to me because I work for home missions, and it's like, man, I need to get you some new promotional material. I mean, we don't think about that kind of stuff. We just let that kind of stuff go, but we need to have excellence in appearance, because believe me, people notice those things when they walk in. How does your church look? How does it smell? Use the senses. Think about your senses. How do things look with your eyes? How do things smell? How do things feel? Is it, as Jim mentioned, is there rooms that are hot, or is it too cold? And I know that's, impossible to please everybody. I understand all of that. But are rooms arranged comfortably? Is it really conducive to moving people into community, and especially in your Sunday school rooms? Or, what does it feel like? Does it feel like you're sitting in a prison cell? Or does it feel like you're really in a comfortable environment where people are going to open up and be a part of community? Do you have critical mass? Man, this is a huge one, and we deal with this in church planting all the time. But for stuff to feel real, you've got to have critical mass. And what I mean by that is if you have a Sunday school class with 1 or 2 kids in it, that is not going to feel very good to those 1 or 2 kids, especially if they're new people or whatever. And so sometimes we have to rearrange things. We have to look at things, how they feel, how they work together. We need to have critical mass, but we can't have overcrowding. I mean, there's a balance in all this stuff. How does stuff sound? And not just in your, I'm not just talking about music or your literal sound from your PA system, but how's the atmosphere in your church? When you walk in, is it like walking into a funeral service? Is it real quiet? Or is it jubilant and happy, and people act like they're excited to be there? And is there music playing in the background, or is there something going on? I mean, I don't like to walk into a quiet room and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I mean, it's just weird. It's awkward. And so make sure your atmosphere is friendly so it puts people at ease. How does it taste? Refreshments that you serve. When you have a guest come to your home, what's the first thing you do? Is there anything I can get you? Would you like something to drink? Would you like something to eat? Would you like a snack? Or would you like a piece of cake or whatever? And I know some churches have problems with food and drink in certain places, and that's fine. I'm not asking you to do anything you're not comfortable doing, but I'm just saying that we need to, there's some comfort around refreshments. And so whether it's a box of donuts or, and especially even in a lot of places, people are health conscious. And this is one of my wife's deals that I never thought about before, but she eats healthy. And so she doesn't want donuts, but she'd like to have a piece of fruit or something. And we need to offer variety for people that have different opinions about different things or whatever. So how does it taste? I mean, all the 5 senses, we need to be excellent in everything that we do when it comes to all of those things. The second thing is we need to have excellence and friendliness. Now, again, I talked about this already a little bit, but most people, if you were to go to people in your church and say, is our church friendly? I believe with all my heart, 95% of people would say, oh, absolutely, our church is friendly. But if you are a visitor that walks into that church, friendliness feels a whole lot different to them than it does to people that are there all the time and that knows everybody. And we are very cliquish by nature, and that's not a bad thing, but it's very excluding when it comes to visitors. And I noticed this because, as some of the other guys have said, our staff, our team, when we travel around, we're visitors everywhere we go. And that stand and greet time that I was talking about earlier, and Tom Rainer's written a lot about that, and there's a lot of buzz, was several months ago, a lot of buzz about that visitors don't like it. You should do away with your meet and greet time. I don't think you necessarily need to do away with it, but don't let it go on for 5 or 10 minutes either. Because people that are talking back and with friends and catching up on how's the kids, how's your mom, how's this person, how's it going, whatever. And we have things to talk about why the visitors are the ones that are standing there thinking this song is lasting forever. I wish we could sit down. I feel very conspicuous. I'm very uncomfortable. Especially introverted, not outgoing people, they feel very uncomfortable about that thing. We need to train our people in our churches to be greeters. Now, we need greeters at the door. We need, you could start in the parking lot, at the door, at the sanctuary doors, in the foyer. We had what we called greeters and hosts when I was pastoring, and our greeters had jobs and our hosts had jobs. But then we tried to teach and train our people that every person in our church is a greeter. And what I mean by that is that I took Wednesday nights and we went through a series of lessons about how that every person in our church needs to be a greeter. And that means that when you see a new person, what do we do when we see a new person? We say, hey, it's good to have you today. Thank you for coming to our church or whatever. And we move on. Well, that's fine, but does that really make that person feel special? Does it really make them feel appreciated? Does it really make them feel wanted? But what if you stop and you say to that person, hey, my name is Brad, what's your name? And they tell you your name and you remember it? How many times has somebody said, hey, my name's John, and you turn around and you say, what was his name? Man, I forgot. What did he say his name was? I mean, we're bad about that, right? So we have to be very intentional and introduce ourselves and be ready for them to tell us our name. Connect it to something so you can remember it. And then say, well, what brought you to our church today? Well, we just happened to, we just moved in the area, or we have a friend, or whatever. They can give you whatever. And say, well, man, it is so good to have you. Is there anything that you need or anything that I can get for you to make your visit better? Do you need to know where anything is? I see you have children. Would you like to take your children back to the children's classes? Or can I show you where the restroom is, or whatever? And then as you're walking them to the children's area, you say, hey, Ken, come here. I want you to meet my new friend. This is John and Amy. This is their first time at our church. Do you think that would make that person feel special? Absolutely. And I had this happen to me. I was doing a secret shopper experience at a church, one of our good churches, and a board member's church. They invited me to come do it, and I was as nervous as I've ever been in my life when I was doing this. But I had the best experience. This guy latched on to us, my wife and I, took us to a Sunday school class, and every person that came in that classroom, he introduced us. And by the time that class was over, I knew 4 or 5 people's names. I felt a lot more comfortable. I felt more like part of them than a visitor. But how many times do visitors come in? They don't learn anybody's names. They don't connect with anybody. They can say, oh, it was a good service or whatever, but it really didn't mean that much. They go out. There's no draw for them really to come back. But if they make a connection with somebody, and man, how great would it be even as they're going out the door, not even a part of the assimilation system, if just somebody in your church says, hey, can I give you my cell phone number and can I get yours? And I'd love to just check on you this week and see if we can invite you over next week for lunch or whatever. Man, I'm telling you, if we taught our people to do that, it would revolutionize our guest experience in our churches. And so we need to have excellence in friendliness. The third thing is we need excellence in our volunteers. I talked a lot about this yesterday. I'm just going to hit a couple of things and we're going to move on. But when a new volunteer begins at our church, when somebody starts a new ministry or starts in a new position, we need to make sure that they know what their responsibilities are without question, that there's a high level of expectation. They need training. Have you ever thought about training your Sunday school workers? I think a lot of times, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but a lot of times I think people are apprehensive to get involved in things because they just don't feel like they're going to know what to do, or they're just not clear about the expectations. They just don't feel comfortable. But if you tell them, hey, we're going to have a training, and do it every 6 months or every year. We did it annually at our church. We did an annual training event for all of our new workers in our church. And we didn't just wait till that year. I mean, we didn't say you can't work till the training time, but we would say we're having a special focus training time at this particular month every year. But when new people would come in, whoever led in that ministry would sit down with them and make sure that they understood everything that there was required and what their responsibilities were going to be and all those sorts of things. And so we need excellence in our volunteers. Like I said, we talked about that yesterday, so I'll move on. And the next one is excellence in programming. Now, let me just make a statement, and then I'm going to try to qualify or explain it. There is no excuse for poor planning in the church. There's just no excuse for it. Now, believe me, I understand things happen. One of the funniest experiences I had in my life was a technological glitch one time when we had this huge program planned, and it was a fiasco, and it was nobody's fault. It just was one of those things. At that particular moment, if you would have taken my blood pressure, it probably would have been about 380 over 250. I mean, I was about to have a stroke because it was my program I was in charge of, and it was everything that could have possibly went wrong. I understand those things happen, okay? But I'm just saying there's no excuse for poor planning. Don't let things just sneak up on you. Keep a calendar. Simple stuff. Make sure that there are people accountable to do other people to do certain things when it needs to be done and all that kind of stuff. When I was, like I said, I understand, and I know I come at this from a little different perspective because I am just a little eensy-weensy bit OCD. But when I was pastoring, Tuesday was my study day. I mean, I guarded my Tuesdays. And my wife was the church secretary, and she knew on Tuesdays, I closed my office door and I immersed myself in study on Tuesday for Sunday morning. That was, I wanted that day to just really focus and study for Sunday morning. And over the years, I had a lot of people say, you prepare your Sunday morning sermon on Tuesday? And I'd say, yes, I do. They say, well, how does God speak to you on Tuesday? What do he wants you to preach on Sunday? And I always say, well, God can speak to me just as good on Tuesday as he would on Saturday or whatever. And I want to be prepared. I've got a plan. That's just who I am. My personality, I mean, I'm very, I like the lists and the detail and all that kind of stuff. I know not everybody does, and that's fine. But there's no excuse for poor planning. And so think through things. It goes back to that thing about what visitors expect. They expect your service to be boring. Don't make your service boring. If you think about it, if you plan it, then it won't be boring. But if you don't think about it in the last minute, you think, oh, I want to do this. Or now I understand sometimes the Spirit moves. I'm not saying don't quench the Spirit. But I'm saying that we need to make sure that we have things planned. Now, you don't have to, go to extremes with this stuff. I understand that. But I'm just saying that think about what you're going to say and what you're going to do. The best example I have of this is when I was on staff at Grace Free Baptist Church in Oklahoma City. As the staff pastor, I had led my first person personally to the Lord on visitation one night. I was so excited, and the pastor told me I could baptize them. Man, I was so excited. I was going to get baptized, my own first convert at this church. And so that Sunday night came, or Sunday morning, whatever it was, and I remember getting down in the baptistry, and I was so excited. And then I thought, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I know it's something about the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and I know I'm supposed to lift a hand. Is it my right hand? Is it my left hand? What am I supposed to say? I mean, I didn't think it through. I didn't think about it. They did not teach me. As much as I love my alma mater, they didn't teach me in any ministry class about what to say when you baptize people. And I'm trying to think back to Edwin Wade, my childhood pastor. What did he say when he baptized people? All this is going through my mind, and it taught me you've got to think through every single thing you do. If I would have thought about that beforehand, I could have at least, asked somebody, well, what is it you're supposed to say? Are there magic words that you have to say or whatever? Or what does that need to look like? And I don't even remember what I said. I who knows, but I made sure I dunked them till bubbles came up, and so it took, and it was good and all that. But we just need to think things through. Think about things. What are you going to say? Does everybody know their responsibilities? That 30 seconds of awkward silence when the ushers are trying to figure out where the offering plates are. Your visitors are going, what in the world is going on? What are we supposed to be doing right now? I mean, we live in a culture and in a society that it is just way too good. And it is too programmed. And our kids, especially our kids and the millennial generation, they are so used to everything being there and top-notch and great quality. It's just what they expect, and we need to have it in the church the best that we can. There should be high expectations, making sure everyone's prepared, that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, and make sure they're on cue to do it. How is every aspect and every part of the service going to go? How are we going to start the service? What's every element of the service? How are we going to end the service? So there's no awkwardness, so that you make sure that you have all this stuff figured out. How are we going to do all the things? How are we going to, in that special meal we're going to have, what's the flow of traffic going to be like? Have you ever gotten in the middle of something and thought, man, I did not think this through. This is a nightmare. It's because we didn't think it through. But if we think, how are we going to get 200 people from point A to point B through two little skinny doors? How are we going to get this done? It's not rocket science. It's just thinking things through. Let me wrap it up with just this very simple idea. And pastors, this includes you. And it's a very difficult thing to do. And I'll be honest with you. But I would encourage every single person here over the next couple of months, just go and be a visitor at a church. Pastor, tell your church what you're doing. Say, I need the Sunday morning off. I'm not taking it off. I'm not on vacation. It doesn't count against me. It's a part of the ministry of this church, but I'm going to church across town because I just want to be a visitor and go and experience what it's like to be a visitor. Church members, tell your pastor, I love you. It's nothing against you. We're not looking for a new church. We're not mad, but we're going to go visit a church this coming Sunday so that we can remember what it's like to be a visitor. And think about the things that they do well. Think about the things that they don't do so well. And think about things that you can do differently in your church. And then when you walk back into your church, look at your church through what I call visitor's eyes. And that means that you look at things differently. You look around, and I do this all the time when I go to our church plants, and I visit our guys that are starting churches. And some of them, man, they've got this nailed down so perfectly. Usually they're guys that are, really pay attention to the detail and that kind of stuff. But guys that are more, kind of people persons. I don't know what that is in the plural, but anyway, they're just more accustomed and easier to get along with people, and the details kind of escape them. They're the ones usually have problems. So if you're that kind of person, you probably need to, and that's great being a people person. You need to be a people person too. But those that tend to focus on people more than they do programs or things, you need to get somebody to help you look at things that you wouldn't look at on your own. And so creating a wow factor in your church is really simply done by just common sense things that we oftentimes don't think about. Looking at things from new perspectives, looking at things from a different angle than we've ever looked at it before. Very quickly, I've still got some pages, but let me very quickly just share with you. When I was on staff at the Ada Church in Oklahoma, Ada First Real Baptist Church, Keith Burden was our pastor, and we decided to do kind of a self-assessment of our church, and we had 3 staff guys at that time and a secretary, and we met with some other leaders in our church, and Brother Keith said, I want all of you, when you come to church this next Sunday, I want you to come from a different way, because we all lived in certain spots from the church, and you come to church the same way. I mean, you pull in the same driveway, you go in the same door, you do the same things, because that's just your routine. It's what you do. It's most convenient. He said, I want every one of you to come to church, use a different street, pull in a different direction or parking lot or whatever, and I want you to notice things you've never noticed before about the exterior of the facility. And so I came in from a different direction, and I looked down this long wall that was actually the original sanctuary, which had been converted when they built a new sanctuary years before, long before that I was on staff there. But that was now a series of classrooms, and it used to be the auditorium. And what they did was they framed up and insulated new walls on the inside of the old walls, and then just drywalled over them. It looked great on the inside, but I had never noticed before, on the outside, you could see the back, you could see insulation and studs through the old windows. And I thought, well, that's pretty ugly. I mean, nobody thought that through very well. But I had been on staff at that church a couple of years. I had never noticed that before because I didn't go that way. I didn't look. I just had never been on. It was kind of a skinny, there wasn't much room there between the property line, the fence, and the building. And so I just had never looked at it before. And I can promise you, your church has things that you've really never noticed before just because you haven't ever taken time to look. But visitors do. And so if we really want to create a wow experience, then we need to look through visitors' eyes, and we need to notice things we've never noticed before. We have to be willing to give God our very best, and sometimes even give up things that will cost us greatly. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much for the time to be able to share together today. We pray your blessings upon Jim as he speaks in this last session, that you would use all of this that we have given over this last couple of days, Lord, just our attempt to give inspiration and information that would be encouraging and helpful to our friends and our brothers and sisters here. So Lord, would you just use our attempt and bless it for your honor and glory, that people would be won to your kingdom. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.